A decorated Army captain returns home early from deployment to surprise his wife at their daughter's birthday party. He walks through the front door with balloons and presents, expecting laughter and celebration. Instead, he finds his wife in the arms of another man, a police officer who's supposed to uphold the law. Within minutes, gunshots shatter the suburban Michigan night. Children scream, guests scatter, and when the smoke clears, nothing will ever be the same. This is the story of betrayal, corruption, and a split-second decision that destroyed multiple families forever. Tonight, we're diving into one of Michigan's most heartbreaking true crime cases. A story that has everything: military honor, marital betrayal, police corruption, and a violent confrontation that left blood on a birthday cake and lives shattered beyond repair. This isn't just another cheating spouse story. This is about what happens when a good man is pushed past his breaking point, when the institutions meant to protect us become the very source of our destruction, and when a single moment of rage creates a cascade of consequences that ripple through an entire community. Before we begin, I need to warn you. This case is deeply disturbing. It involves infidelity, violence, and the deaths of people who should still be alive today. But it's a story that needs to be told because it reveals the darkest corners of human nature and the devastating cost of deception. Let's go back to where it all started. Our story centers on a man we'll call Captain James Thornton, a 34-year-old Army officer stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. By all accounts, he was the epitome of military excellence. Multiple commendations, 2 tours overseas, respected by his subordinates and admired by his superiors. But his pride and joy wasn't his military career, it was his family. He'd been married to his wife, Victoria, for 11 years. They'd met in college. He was in ROTC, she was studying to be a teacher. They fell hard and fast, married young, and built what everyone thought was an unshakable partnership. They had 2 beautiful children, a 10-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter named Lily. From the outside, the Thorntons were the American dream personified. The social media posts showed family barbecues, vacation photos, and endless expressions of love and support during deployment. Victoria played the role of the devoted military wife perfectly, attending unit functions, organizing care packages, leading support groups for other military spouses. But beneath the surface, cracks had been forming for months. The deployments had grown longer, the phone calls grew shorter, and Victoria had grown lonely. Or so she would later claim. While her husband was serving overseas, risking his life for his country, she was back in their suburban Michigan home, slowly detaching from the vows she'd made. The affair began innocuously enough. Or at least that's how these things always start, isn't it? A flat tire on the highway, a police officer stopping to help, exchange numbers, just in case of emergency, then coffee, then lunch, then something far more sinister. The officer's name was Detective Brian Walsh, a 38-year-old decorated member of the local police department, married himself with 3 kids of his own. On paper, he was another pillar of the community, the kind of cop who coached Little League and showed up at charity fundraisers. But Detective Walsh had a reputation that the public didn't see. Internal affairs complaints that mysteriously disappeared, evidence that went missing from drug busts, and a pattern of behavior that his fellow officers whispered about but never officially reported. He was corrupt, and he was predatory. And somehow he'd set his sights on Victoria Thornton. As Captain Thornton fulfilled his duty thousands of miles away, the affair between Victoria and Detective Walsh intensified. They weren't just having a fling, they were building an entire secret life together. Text messages flew back and forth, thousands of them. Late-night phone calls when the kids were asleep. Secret meetings in hotel rooms across town. Victoria would drop the children at her mother's house and disappear for hours, returning with elaborate lies about shopping trips and spa days. Detective Walsh used his position to facilitate the affair. He had access to information that civilians didn't. He knew patrol schedules, could track phone records if needed, and worst of all, he believed he was untouchable because of his badge. The arrogance was stunning. At one point, Victoria's neighbors reported seeing a police cruiser parked in her driveway late at night multiple times a week. When questioned later, Walsh claimed he was conducting welfare checks on the family of a deployed service member. The manipulation went deeper. Walsh began poisoning Victoria against her husband. He told her that military men were all the same: emotionally unavailable, damaged, incapable of real intimacy. He convinced her that she deserved better, that her husband didn't appreciate her sacrifices, that she should start thinking about her future. It was textbook predatory behavior, but Victoria couldn't see it. Or maybe she didn't want to. Meanwhile, Captain Thornton had no idea. He would video call his family whenever possible, seeing his wife's smiling face and believing everything was fine. His daughter would show him her schoolwork. His son would talk about soccer practice. And Victoria would blow kisses at the camera and tell him how much she missed him. The betrayal wasn't just sexual, it was spiritual. It was the systematic destruction of trust built over more than a decade. But secrets have a way of coming to light, and fate was about to intervene in the most explosive way possible. In early autumn, Captain Thornton's daughter Lily was about to turn 9 years old. Victoria planned an elaborate birthday party: bounce house, face painting, pizza, the works. She'd invited half of Lily's class, plus neighborhood families and friends. What Victoria didn't know was that her husband had pulled strings to get emergency leave. He'd finished a critical mission ahead of schedule and decided to surprise his family. He'd coordinated with his commanding officer, booked a last-minute flight, and planned to walk through the door just as the party was hitting its peak. He imagined his daughter's face lighting up. He imagined hugging his son. He imagined his wife's tears of joy. He had no idea he was walking into a nightmare. The party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Captain Thornton's flight landed Friday night, but his connecting flight was delayed. By the time he got a rental car and started the 3-hour drive to his Michigan home, it was late, almost midnight. He thought about waiting until morning, but he couldn't help himself. He missed his family so desperately that he decided to drive through the night. He'd arrive early Saturday morning, get a few hours of sleep, and surprise everyone at the party. As he drove through the dark Michigan highways, he felt at peace for the first time in months. He was going home, to his family, to everything that mattered. He had no idea that back at his house, Detective Walsh was in his bed, with his wife. I need to pause here for just a moment. If you're gripped by this story, if you can feel the tension building and you want to know what happens next, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Cases like this take hours of research, and your support helps us continue bringing you the most compelling true crime content on YouTube. Also, drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that changed your life? Let's build a community where we can discuss these difficult topics together. Okay, back to the story. And this is where everything explodes. Captain Thornton pulled into his driveway at roughly 6 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban street. Everything looked peaceful, normal. He grabbed his duffel bag from the trunk, noticing how well-maintained the lawn was, how the flowers Victoria had planted were blooming beautifully. A smile crossed his face. His wife took such good care of their home. As he approached the front door, something caught his eye. An unfamiliar car parked on the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It looked official, almost like an unmarked police vehicle. He thought maybe it belonged to a neighbor's guest and dismissed it. He quietly unlocked the front door, not wanting to wake anyone. The house was silent. He set his bag down in the entryway and took a moment to breathe in the familiar scent of home. But something felt off. Call it military training. Call it intuition. Call it the universe giving him one last warning before his world collapsed. He noticed a man's jacket draped over the living room chair. Definitely not his. Black leather, heavy, with something clipped to the belt. His heart rate quickened. Then he heard it. A sound coming from upstairs, from his bedroom. His legs moved automatically, carrying him toward the staircase. Each step felt like moving through quicksand. Part of him wanted to turn around, to pretend he hadn't seen anything, to preserve whatever illusion of happiness he'd been clinging to. But he kept climbing. At the bedroom door, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. He could hear voices now, low, intimate, unmistakable. His wife's laughter, a man's deep voice. He opened the door. The scene before him was every deployed service member's worst nightmare. His wife, in his bed, with another man, naked, entangled, completely unaware that her husband was standing in the doorway. For a moment, time stopped. The world narrowed to just this image, burning itself into his brain forever. Then Victoria looked up. Her eyes met his, and the scream that came out of her mouth was the sound of guilt and terror combined. Detective Walsh jumped out of bed, scrambling for his clothes. But Captain Thornton's military training kicked in. He saw the gun belt on the floor, Walsh's service weapon within arm's reach. "Don't even think about it," Thornton said, his voice deadly calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. Walsh, to his credit or his stupidity, didn't listen. He lunged for the weapon. What happened next would later be debated in courtrooms and analyzed by experts, but the basic facts are these. Captain Thornton was faster. He'd been trained in close-quarters combat. He'd disarmed insurgents in war zones. A naked, panicked police officer was no match for his speed and precision. Thornton got to the gun first. Now armed, the power dynamic shifted completely. Walsh backed against the wall, hands up, suddenly very aware that he was facing a trained soldier who'd just discovered him in bed with his wife. "Please," Walsh said. "Please, let's talk about this. Let me explain." Victoria was sobbing, pulling sheets around her body, stammering apologies that meant nothing. The words tumbled out. "It's not what it looks like." The most absurd lie anyone could tell in that moment. "How long?" Thornton asked, his voice shaking now. The calm was breaking. Underneath was a rage so profound it threatened to consume everything. Neither of them answered. That silence told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was an affair. Calculated, prolonged, and executed in his own home while he was serving his country. The gun in his hand felt heavy. He'd carried weapons for years, always with discipline and control. But standing there, facing the complete destruction of his family, something inside him cracked. "You're a cop," he said to Walsh. "You're supposed to protect families. Instead, you destroy them." Walsh made the fatal mistake of trying to assert authority. "I'm a police officer. You need to put that weapon down right now, or you're going to make this so much worse for yourself." The audacity, the sheer audacity of this man to invoke his badge while standing naked in another man's bedroom, having just slept with that man's wife. Something in Captain Thornton snapped. The first shot was a warning, fired into the ceiling. The sound was deafening in the enclosed bedroom. Victoria screamed. Walsh dropped to the floor. "Get out," Thornton said. "Get out of my house, both of you." But the situation had already spiraled beyond control. The gunshot had woken the children. Down the hall, Captain Thornton could hear his son calling out, "Dad? Daddy, is that you?" The sound of his son's voice, so innocent, so trusting, cut through the rage like a knife. Suddenly, Thornton seemed to realize what he was doing, where he was, and what was at stake. "Stay in your room," he shouted to his children. "Do not come out here." But it was too late. The damage had already begun. Detective Walsh, thinking the distraction gave him an opening, made another move toward Thornton. Maybe he thought he could overpower him. Maybe he thought he could de-escalate. Maybe he was just panicked and stupid. The second shot wasn't a warning. It struck Walsh in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the floor. Blood spread across the carpet, the same carpet where Captain Thornton's children had played as babies, where the family had laughed and built pillow forts and created memories that now felt poisoned. Victoria was screaming uncontrollably now. Walsh was groaning, clutching his shoulder, and Captain Thornton stood there with the smoking gun, realizing that he just crossed a line he could never uncross. The military training that had saved his life overseas had just destroyed his life at home. What happened in the next few minutes is somewhat unclear as accounts vary depending on who's telling the story. What we know for certain is this. Captain Thornton called 911 himself. His voice on the recording is haunting, flat, emotionless, almost robotic. He reported that he'd shot an intruder in his home. He gave his address. He stated that he was a military officer and that he would be unarmed when police arrived. Then he went to his children's rooms. He tried to comfort them, tried to explain that everything would be okay, even though he knew it wouldn't be. His daughter was crying for her birthday party. His son was asking why there was shouting and loud noises. He couldn't give them answers that made sense because nothing made sense anymore. When the police arrived, Walsh's fellow officers, his friends, and colleagues, the scene was chaotic. They found their detective wounded but alive, a decorated army captain sitting calmly on the front porch with his hands visible, and a hysterical woman trying to explain what had happened. The body camera footage from that morning shows something remarkable. Captain Thornton displaying zero resistance. He allowed himself to be handcuffed without protest. He answered questions directly and honestly. He never tried to justify or minimize what he'd done. "I shot him," he said simply. "He was with my wife, in my bed. I'd just returned from deployment. I shot him." The truth was evident in every word. This wasn't a calculated murder. This wasn't premeditated violence. This was a man who'd been psychologically destroyed and had reacted in a moment of pure, overwhelming anguish. But the law doesn't always account for broken hearts. We're approaching the end of this devastating story, but before we get to the final outcomes, I want to ask you something. Do you think Captain Thornton was justified? Should the legal system account for extreme emotional distress? This is a complicated case with no easy answers. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know where you stand on this. And if you haven't already, smash that like button. It helps more people find these important stories. Now let's talk about what happened after the arrest. Captain Thornton was charged with attempted murder and multiple weapons offenses. The prosecution argued that regardless of emotional state, he had no right to shoot an unarmed man. They painted him as a violent individual who'd brought his combat mentality home and couldn't distinguish between a war zone and civilian life. The defense told a very different story. They argued that Captain Thornton had suffered extreme emotional disturbance, a legal concept that, while not excusing the crime, explains the context in which it occurred. They brought in military psychologists who testified about the unique stresses of deployment and the psychological impact of discovering infidelity. But the case took an unexpected turn when Detective Walsh's history came to light during discovery. The internal affairs complaints that had been buried suddenly resurfaced. Fellow officers given immunity came forward with stories of Walsh's corruption, evidence tampering, sexual harassment of female colleagues, abuse of power. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd been gaming the system for years. More damning still, Walsh had targeted other military wives. Captain Thornton's wife wasn't his first affair with a deployed service member's spouse. There was a pattern, a deliberate pattern of predatory behavior toward vulnerable women whose husbands were overseas. This revelation changed public perception dramatically. Suddenly, Captain Thornton wasn't just a jealous husband. He was a victim of a corrupt officer who'd systematically abused his position and authority. As for Victoria, she faced no criminal charges, but her life was destroyed nonetheless. Her teaching license was revoked after the scandal became public. Her children, removed from her custody temporarily, struggled with the trauma. And the community that had once embraced her now turned its back completely. The birthday party that was supposed to celebrate her daughter's 9th year instead became the day that child lost her innocence, her family structure, and her sense of safety in the world. Captain Thornton ultimately took a plea deal, 5 years in prison for aggravated assault, with credit for time served and possibility of parole after 3 years. His military career was over. His marriage was dissolved. His relationship with his children would have to be rebuilt from nothing. Detective Walsh survived his wounds but was fired from the police department and faced multiple civil lawsuits from people he'd wronged over the years. His own marriage ended. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. This case raises profound questions about betrayal, justice, and the breaking point of human endurance. When do we become our worst selves? What pushes a good person to commit violence? And how do we rebuild when everything we believed in turns out to be a lie? There are no winners in this story, just broken people, traumatized children, and communities left to pick up the pieces of a tragedy that never had to happen. The birthday party that should have been filled with joy instead became a crime scene. The soldier who fought for his country came home to fight a different kind of battle, one he was destined to lose from the moment he opened that bedroom door. This is the reality of betrayal. This is the cost of corruption. This is what happens when institutions fail and human beings break. If this story affected you, please share it. Not for the views, but because these conversations matter. Because understanding how we fall helps us figure out how to avoid falling in the first place. Subscribe for more deep dives into the cases that reveal the darkest and most complex aspects of human nature. And remember, behind every true crime story are real people whose lives were forever changed. Stay safe out there, and hold your loved ones close.